continues.
Good morning. As promised on the screen, Congressman Bernie Sanders of Vermont. And today, Mr. Sanders will be presenting a piece of legislation that is going through Congress as an amendment to the Science, State, and Justice legislation. But it has to deal with a provision of the Patriot Act, Section 215, that he has been out talking about since the Patriot bill became law. What does 215 do?
Well, with 215, what my concern is that 215, as currently written, allows the FBI to go into a library and say, we would like Susan Swain's reading records, and they can get those records without really giving probable cause as to why they think you or anybody else in America is, in fact, a terrorist. All of us are concerned about terrorism. All of us want the government to do everything that we can to protect the American people. But I don't think we want to give a blank check to the FBI or any government agency basically to walk into what is a secret court and say to a judge, Judge, we're doing an investigation on terrorism, and the judge then really has no option but to say, okay, you can go in and get the reading records at a library or a bookstore, regardless, without having made the case to a judge, an independent judiciary, that somebody is in fact a terrorist.
Why does the judge have no option?
Because the way the language is written is that if the FBI says that we're doing an investigation on international terrorism, which they certainly are, the judge says, okay, you can go in. So sometimes our opponents on this thing will say, well, they have to get permission from a judge, but really that's not the case. While they do, the judge has no option, given the way that the bill is written. And I think there is a lot of anxiety in America today. You know, we have a lot of economic problems. Middle class is shrinking. The gap between the rich and the poor is growing wider. Healthcare system is in trouble. People are concerned about the war in Iraq. And people are feeling very uneasy about losing their privacy rights and allowing the government to have more and more power to spy on us, if you like. And Susan, one of the aspects of this legislation that interests me is I am a progressive and proud of it. But we have been working with some of the most conservative members of Congress, who I think as honest conservatives believe in limited government. And they do not believe that we should be giving the government the power to monitor the reading habits of the American people. Our legislation, our efforts are also being supported by the American Library Association, the American Booksellers Association, and millions of Americans all over this country have expressed concerns about various aspects of the Patriot Act.
And to that end, yesterday in the Washington Times there was a front page story with this headline, Conservatives, Liberals Align Against Patriot Act. Barr, and that's former Representative Bob Barr of Georgia, leads fight to derail Bush's renewal priority. Let me just have people understand a little bit about the process here. When the Patriot Act became law, there were a number of key provisions that were intended to sunset in various years, so the Congress would have a chance to revisit them.
Exactly.
Is this one of them?
Yes.
And so therefore what's going on right now is an appropriately timed discussion about whether or not this works.
It is. This is, in fact, a separate effort from the overall analysis of the USA Patriot Act. This is taking place within the context of the Commerce, Justice, State appropriations bill that is coming to the floor today. One of the concerns that many of us have is that the current Republican leadership has not allowed a whole lot of amendments to come to the floor in opposition to what they are trying to do. So we're seizing this opportunity to essentially say the Justice Department cannot use federal money to go into libraries and bookstores. Now, I want to tell you a little bit of history on this bill. Last summer, we brought this amendment up, and we had widespread support from the Democrats. Almost all Democrats voted for it. I'm an independent. Democrats voted for it. We had a lot of support from Republicans. At the end of regulation time, we were ahead. My memory is correct by about 18 votes. And I said, gee, we won a major victory. A lot of people concerned about the Patriot Act. This is the first victory. You know what happened? Tom DeLay and the Republican leadership simply refused to gavel the vote down. And in the next 20 minutes, beyond the normal time, we have 17 minutes to vote, they kept the voting rolls open. They went around twisting Republican arms. We lost 10 votes, and we lost that vote on a 210 to 210 tie. And there was a lot of people who were really angry when DeLay and these other folks were saying, don't worry about us impinging on democratic rights in America. You can trust us. And then they kept the voting rolls open for an extra 20 minutes in order to twist arms. So that left a very bad taste.
What are you expecting to happen today?
I think it's going to be a very close vote again. I think it's going to come down to a few votes. I think we got a shot at it. It's going to be close.
Now, we are going to get some calls here saying that you're soft on terrorism. You've heard the criticism as you've toured around. What's your response?
No, nobody is soft on terrorism in the United States Congress, I hope. Everybody understands that terrorism is a very serious threat. It is quite possible and tragic that there may be another attack on the United States. And we have got to do, as a country, everything that we can to protect the American people from terrorism. But the issue is, and this unites conservatives and progressives, can we effectively fight terrorism and protect the American people without undermining the constitutional rights which have made us a free country? That's the issue. And I feel very, very strongly that it is wrong to give up our basic freedoms. That is not what we should be doing. And you're seeing a lot of people coming together to say, yeah, fight terrorism, but protect our constitutional rights.
Before we go to calls, then, what would you specifically do to change the process on 215?
Well, what today's legislation is about is a very simple one. It simply, our amendment simply takes out libraries and bookstores from the language that the FBI can investigate. So they will not be able to go into libraries and bookstores. They will not be able to monitor the reading habits of the American people. And the reason I'm doing that is that librarians in Vermont and all over this country are telling me, we don't want, when people go into the library and they take out a book, you know, maybe it's a biography of Osama bin Laden, maybe it's a book on terrorism. They don't want somebody monitoring their reading habits and thinking that they're a terrorism because they're reading a certain book. We don't want kids not to be looking at certain ideas because somebody may think they're a terrorist. It creates a kind of intellectual chill in America.
So if in the course of investigation it is determined that these kinds of records should be searched, then how would...
Very simple, Susan, and that's a good question. Historically, traditionally, the FBI has been able to go into libraries, has been able to go into bookstores. I believe they should be able to. If they make the case that somebody is a terrorist and they need to investigate that person and go into a library or bookstore, I want them to do that. We all want them to do that. But they have to make the case. There has to be some judicial oversight. You just can't go in there and say, we're doing an independent investigation. Maybe somebody wrote a letter to the editor, critical of the President of the United States. We're going to go investigate their reading habits. Is that what we want? I don't think so. But if the FBI can make that case, go for it. We want them to go after terrorists and be successful in that effort.
Just two clarifications. Does the Patriot law require the reporting to Congress on how the various provisions are in fact being conducted? I'm asking that because do you know how this provision, how often it's been used?
The FBI has, the Justice Department has told us that since 9/11, for libraries and bookstores, it has not been used at all. And that's what they say. Now, you know, we live at a time when there's a lot of skepticism about what anybody in government is saying. That is what they say. And our argument is, if in the last 5 years you haven't used it, why do you have to make librarians and booksellers nervous all over this country?
Georgetown, Maryland, you're first up for Mr. Sanders. You're on the air.
Yes, hi, Bernie. I'm a Democrat, but I really support the things that you're trying to do. I'm just concerned about how you're going to get around this lockdown with Palm delay this time. And what chance does this have to garner? Have you counted the votes, in other words? And I think one of the problems is because it's such a lockdown in Republican control right now, there's no hearings about anything. And I think people deserve to hear. And nobody's calling any hearings on numerous items. And what do you think the chances are that this is going to get through this time, Bernie?
As I indicated, last time we lost on a 210 vote. The President of the United States has said that he will veto the legislation if my amendment passes. I think you're going to come down to the wire. I think we'll probably win by a few votes or lose by a few votes. We're working very hard on it. And I think the American people do need to hear a lot more debate on this issue. Everybody wants to fight terrorism and protect the American people. But we want to do it in a way that does not impinge on the rights that make us a free people.
Manville, New Jersey, GOP line.
Yeah, how you doing?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Speak up, sir. Oh, we lost him for some reason. Let's move on. Gary, Indiana, independent line.
Good morning.
Good morning.
The thing that concerns me the most is that at the same time the media is selling us this alleged economic recovery, which has yet to reach anyone below $50,000 a year, and unfortunately, the middle class, as you said, Mr. Sanders, is shrinking. they are taking a look at taking away our rights. Now, it seems to me that they're looking more or less to control the population rather than control terrorism, and I am scared. We're going headlong into the biggest group or bunch of malfeasance that I've seen in Washington since Watergate. And yet nobody's talking about it, or there's always two sides to the story. Can you comment on that?
Sure, Gary, some of us are talking about it. I mean, let's just talk about the economy, and you're right. I'm on the Financial Services Committee, and every week somebody from the administration comes up and says, oh, the economy is making a great recovery. The reality is that 90% of American workers today are earning less in real wages than was the case 30 years ago. The gap between the rich and the poor is growing incredibly wide. While we have more and more millionaires and billionaires, we have 4 million more people living in poverty than was the case just 4 years ago. Our trade policy is a total disaster. We're losing millions of good-paying manufacturing jobs to China, where people are desperate people working for 30 cents an hour. Now they want to pass more disastrous trade agreements. So while the economy is, in fact, disintegrating for the middle class, while healthcare situation is getting worse and worse, you're quite right. We have a government which says, no, we're not going to help people in health care. We're not going to help people in education, but we are certainly going to be trying to enforce, give more power to government authorities to spy on the American people. And I think that is a set of priorities which is exactly backwards. I think, and honest conservatives understand that, and that's why we are working with them.
With regard to Section 215 of the Patriot Act, which is what we're talking about here, how has the Attorney General responded to this concern?
He has indicated that there might be a little bit of movement on the part of the administration. On the other hand, what is very distressing, and you should know this, and the viewers should know this, there are 7 state legislatures in the United States and over 300 communities that have gone on record expressing concerns about the Patriot Act. So all over this country, people are standing up and say, hey, we want our constitutional rights and civil liberties protected. And what's happened? In the Senate, the Intelligence Committee not only reauthorized all of the sunsetted provisions, they went even further, giving even more power to the government to spy on the American people. So they are moving in exactly the wrong direction. I hope that if we win today, it will be a movement back in the direction of protecting civil liberties.
Fresno, California, GOP line.
Hi. Could you talk a little bit about, how the Patriot Act is applying to Internet service providers? Because I know there's something similar to the FBI or other law enforcement agencies being able to look into records without warrants. And also, I have an Iraq question. There was an article John Burns co-wrote in New York Times front page about the training of Iraqi troops and how that is going. And I'm never getting a clear answer as to how combat-ready troops translates into reducing U.S. forces. And there's just a lot of muddled talk about that. And I'd love to have some clear answers on that. Thank you very much.
In terms of the Internet, you've asked an interesting question. Section 215, as presently written, allows the FBI to monitor Internet use within libraries. And in fact, my last amendment last year excluded the FBI from that. We made a change because some members are concerned. But the ability of the government to get into the Internet is something that is concerned. And on another issue that we are dealing with, the so-called Media Indecency Act, there are people right now in the Senate who are talking about applying FCC standards to cable television, which conceivably means that programs like The Sopranos or Sex and the City or The Jon Stewart Show or The Bill Maher Show literally can be taken off. And they also want, quote-unquote, indecency standards to go on the Internet. We're going to fight that very, very vigorously. I mean, I hear the president talking a whole lot about freedom, freedom, freedom. He wants freedom all over the world. Well, what about freedom here in the United States of America? People have the right to read in this country what they want to read. That's what the First Amendment is about. That's what America is supposed to be about. In terms of Iraqi troops, I read the same article that you did. Apparently progress is not being made as quickly as possible, and that is really unfortunate. My own view as somebody who voted against giving the president authority to go to war in Iraq and helped lead that effort, is I believe we have got to begin the process of bringing home our troops as soon as we possibly can. I think we've got to give support to the Iraqi people and their military so that they can defend themselves. But I think the day is coming where we've got to stop bringing our troops back home.
In doing some research for our conversation, I found an article written by the Dartmouth Review from a panel session that you were on at Dartmouth last year. And the Dartmouth Review, which is a student newspaper, I think,
yes, ma'am,
cites this section I want you to respond to. Michael Mello, co-panelist, a law professor from UVM, admitted he didn't like several sections of the Act, but considered most parts innocuous. The infamous Section 215 and other heavily impugned components, says the paper, were mere codifications of pre-Patriot Act statutes and case law. I want to respond to that. And then he said, in effect, the good professor claimed very little of substance had actually changed. And in a delicious bit of irony not lost on any conservative in the room, Mello explained that most of the abridgments of liberty, that's in quotes, were actually signed into law in the 1970s by Jimmy Carter.
I don't agree with the professor. I think the ability of government agents and the FBI to walk into any library, any bookstore in this country, without any probable cause. And then when you go to the librarian and say, I want these records, the librarian cannot make that public. At best, she can talk to her attorney. If she makes that public, that the FBI is coming to her library, she is in violation of the law as well. That is new. And that
so you can't see your own records if they're requested.
That's right. And the individual under investigation does not know anything about that as well.
And with regard to the innocuous nature and the fact that it was codifications of prior standards and had been around since Jimmy Carter, you agree?
I mean, there is a reason, let me tell you, that and I have to say, I don't know how many librarians are watching the program. I have gained a whole lot of respect for librarians who have gone above and beyond the call of duty. You know, we think of librarians, please get me this book, help me with this book. They are there saying, they as librarians want to make sure that people who use their services can do so without fear. And there has been a huge effort on the part of librarians to fight this provision. Hundreds of thousands of people have contacted members of Congress on this issue. People have signed petitions. And again, all over this country, whether you're progressive or conservatives, people are saying, wait a second, this Patriot Act is going too far.
Greensboro, North Carolina, good morning.
Good morning. Mr. Sanders, I look forward to the possibility that you'll become a senator for your state.
Thank you very much.
I've just got one little question. I'm in an unfortunate situation. I have 2 Republican senators and 1 Republican representative. And although I call them and let them know my opinion, I wonder just how much that has to do. And I'm just wondering, for a person in my shape who does not get representation, what would you suggest that we do with our desires, with what we want?
Well, you've asked a very important question, and I think many people in this country feel increasingly alienated from the political process. Their standard of living is going down. They don't have any health care. They're losing their pensions. They're concerned about the war in Iraq. And who is listening to them? Yesterday, Susan, I think was in these papers, the Republican Party held a fundraising dinner, and they raised millions and millions of dollars. It is very clear to me, and I think many Americans, that Congress listens to millionaires and billionaires and gives tax breaks to those people and does nothing about raising the minimum wage or taking care of the needs of ordinary people. I think ordinary people have got to be involved now in changing the political culture of our country. If we do in Vermont, I have to tell you, I do dozens and dozens of town meetings all over the state. And unlike the President of the United States, I allow people to come to the meetings who actually disagree with me, because that's what I think democracy is about. So I think hold meetings, invite your local representative, say, look, we're going to have a meeting on the Patriot Act. We're having a meeting on the economy. We're having a meeting on the war in Iraq. We're going to have 100 people out. We want you to be there. Come on out and talk to us. Answer questions. That is what democracy is about, and I would agree with the caller that fewer Americans feel that is, in fact, what's happening.
Bernie Sanders was first elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 1990. That makes him the longest-serving independent in the history of the House of Representatives. Next telephone call for him is New York City. I'm sorry, Great Falls, Virginia. Go ahead.
Hello. I'd like to say to your guest, thank you for announcing to the terrorists how they can sit and wait and go into libraries and bookstores now with your wonderful amendment. Now, let's just also like to ask you, what country are you representing? Because I'm not really sure you're representing the United States of America, sir. When we have a country where a construction worker can't hang an American flag on the day before Flag Day, but God forbid we don't we have to handle with white gloves Korans, which we gave to the prisoners at Guantanamo Bay, then I'd like to know what the hell country you're representing, sir, because you're not representing mine.
Well, I believe I am representing the United States of America, and I believe that I'm representing the vast majority of the people who are concerned about terrorism, but are not going to throw the Constitution of the United States in the toilet bowl in that fight. We can fight terrorism. We can protect basic rights. And in my view, what America is precisely about is that people can read a book without worrying that the government and Big Brother are monitoring their reading habits. So you and I, sir, have a difference of opinion on that.
Pine Mountain, Georgia, Independent Line. Good morning to you.
Good morning. I just want to say that I think the citizens of Vermont should just thank their lucky stars. They have somebody like Bernie Sanders working for them. It's like this man has come off of Mars. Anyway, I'm a big fan of Bernie Sanders. I live in Georgia, but by way of New York. I was a New Yorker all my life. And I totally agree with him. And I just wanted to say I think he's doing a wonderful job for all of us as citizens, something that I feel this administration just totally doesn't care about. I feel like as far as losing our rights, he's totally right. I mean, this is what Hitler did after the Reichstag fire in Germany before World War II started, where he told the citizens, well, you have to give up your rights so we can fight terrorism. I mean, once we give up our rights, that's it. I mean, the ball game is over. We already have lost so many of our rights, and I feel that Bernie Sanders and the few people that are like him in Congress are our greatest advocates, the advocates of the citizens of the United States who understand what this country is all about, what we fought for during this country is based on dissent and wanting those rights that the people during the Revolutionary War fought for. And he really understands that. And I just wanted to thank you so much for being the kind of representative you are and keeping our rights intact.
Well, thank you. And let me just say, I mean, I'm doing what I can do. There are many other members of Congress. And again, I want to reiterate, this is not just a progressive effort. We have a lot of honest conservatives who are doing a tremendous job. People who on 98% of the issues, we are on very different sides of how we feel about those issues. But on the issue of protecting constitutional rights, you're seeing a lot of progressives and conservatives coming together.
In fact, a number of the critics have formed the Patriot Act Reform Caucus in the House of Representatives. Some of those leaders, in addition to Mr. Sanders, include Jeff Flake of Arizona, Republican, Ron Paul of Texas, Republican, and Jerry Nadler of New York. What about the Senate?
In the Senate, there is opposition as well. They're moving along a different tack, but you're going to see people standing up, I believe, in the Senate to protect civil liberties as well.
And how would this amendment today to this particular spending bill work its way through the process?
Well, the way it works its way through the process is the normal way. If this amendment passes, it will then go to conference committee, and we'll be doing everything we can to make sure that it stays in the final bill.
And is there a single equivalent of Bernie Sanders on the Senate side who is a lead on this issue?
Russ Feingold, among many others, has been playing a good role.
New York City, good morning.
Good morning. Just to define myself for this discussion, I am white, and I came to the United States at the height of the apartheid era from South Africa. I was a young girl, and after a few days here, I had an epiphany. I could see that I could read anything and buy any book without fear of retribution, because South Africa used this as a pretext for lots of arrests and invading homes and libraries. And when I saw that I could read anything without fear, I felt that I was truly free for the first time. Although as a white South African, they told me ostensibly I was free. And so I support Bernie Sanders in every way and hope that he's successful in his efforts. Thank you.
You know, thank you very much, caller. The caller reminds, I think, me and all of us something about our history. I think what concerns me about what the Bush administration is doing is they're saying trust us. I mean, we're only going to go after the bad guys. You don't have to worry. But I think we don't have to look too far back any further than the 1960s, where one of the bad guys who was under FBI investigation was a man to whom we now celebrate once a year, Martin Luther King Jr. He was considered a bad guy. His phone was being tapped. So in a nation of law, where we have a Constitution and a Bill of Rights, the issue is not trust the administration, trust any administration. We have got to have laws that protect basic constitutional rights, and that's what we're fighting for.
Have any comments on the hearing of Mr. Sensenbrenner's committee on the Patriot Act renewal and what happened there?
Yeah, I wasn't there, but it's again indicative of something that concerns me. As I understand it, Mr. Sensenbrenner did not like some of the testimony that he was hearing, and he gavelled it down and he walked out. That is not the way you should be treating witnesses that come before a congressional committee. You have to give them respect, even if you don't like what they say. Believe me, I go to many committee hearings. I'm a ranking member on one of the financial services subcommittees. Hear a lot of stuff I don't like. You're not rude. You don't say, sorry, goodbye, I'm leaving. And that again tells the American people that are those people who have the power now going to be tolerant? Are they going to allow different points of view to be heard? So I think what Mr. Sensenbrenner did was very unfortunate.
Greenwich, Connecticut. Good morning. Democrats line.
Yes, Mr. Sanders. I think we're putting a muzzle on the American people, and this is a sad witness to our military being rented out to crush any interest of these corporate powers. It's a sad witnessing of our military into a mercenary force to control the world's financial interests. It's just another banker's war. It's I just came back from Germany, and they have a Green Party over there, a parliamentary form of government where the foreign minister of Germany is a member of the Green Party, and there's a communist interest there. We had 3% of the American people voting for the Green Party and 48% for the Democrats and the Republicans. We need a third party. If the Green Party was represented as a 100% type of parliamentary government, there wouldn't have been a war over there. And this Bush administration, I can go back to what Lincoln said: corporations are being enthroned, and an era of corruption in high places will follow, and the money power of the country will endeavor to prolong its reign by working on the prejudices of the people until the wealth is aggravated in a few hands and the republic is destroyed. We don't have a republic here. We don't have democracy. We have a corporate-owned two-party system that's controlled by the money supply. And I like your response on this, Mr. Graham. Mr. Sanders, I respect you very much. You're
Thank
a great
you.
American.
I mean, the gentleman said a lot. All that I'll say is I am very proud of my state, which had the courage to go outside of the two-party system and elect the first independent elected to Congress in 40 years.
You have been pretty critical of the Republican leaders in the House of Representatives during our conversation this morning. But let me have you put into context the fact that your amendment is back on the floor, and of 36 amendments to this State and Justice Appropriations Bill today, yours has the longest time allotted for debate. So how do you square those two?
Well, that's something I wanted I talked to the ranking member on that, because this is an issue of such importance that I wanted both sides to be able to make their case. What you're saying is true, Susan, but the reality is that there are many other very, very important bills that come down on the floor where amendments are simply not allowed. Bankruptcy bill, the case in point. And I think very few people would dispute that the Republican leadership has allowed fewer amendments or less debate on important issues than has been the case in the past. I would refer you not only to what happened to me last year, where Tom DeLay kept the voting rolls open an extra 20 minutes. Probably one of the most important bills that was passed in the last several years was the so-called Medicare prescription drug bill, which I thought was a disaster written by the pharmaceutical industry. At the end of regulation time, those of us who were against that bill had won. The Republican leadership kept that bill open 3 hours, from 3 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock in the morning, to twist arms to get the votes they need. That does not sound to me like a very fair or democratic process.
Long Island on the GOP line. You're on the air. Good morning.
Yes, how you doing, Congressman? I usually applaud the work that everybody does, but it's hard for me to applaud when I constantly hear people talking so badly about the other side of the aisle. And I just, I have a comment and then a question. My comment is that we really need you guys to work together so much better than what you guys have been, because, I mean, we elect you guys to the office. You guys are supposed to do our bidding, what we want, how we want it, what we think we need, and how we think our future should go. You know what? Not one elected official has ever done what his body of people wants them to do. They simply follow the lobbyists and what the big money men that put them there want them to do. I mean, like, if you're, like, you're talking about the meeting before, if you're not even there at the meeting, how can you comment on it? And why does it seem that any of the laws or bills being passed through the Congress and through Senate are benefiting the rich? For instance, HS 256 swept through Congress with almost little to no fight from any representatives there. HS 256 is one of the worst things that could...
Remind me, sir, what was H 256?
It was the bill making Chapter 11 and Chapter 13 bankruptcy.
Oh, the bankruptcy bill, yes. Yeah. You're right.
Difficult.
Yep.
The one that was made up by the credit card company.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. All right, let me just jump in, sir. I mean, what I want to reiterate is that the effort today that I am bringing forth has the support of people who have very different political points of view. We are trying to reach out and find common ground on this issue. The point that you made about big money controlling what goes on in the bankruptcy bill being a case in point is exactly right. Whether it is the pharmaceutical industry, the credit card companies, big banks, the insurance companies, almost every piece of legislation that comes down on the floor of the House that has financial implications is controlled and pushed by these guys who make huge campaign contributions. I think, sir, if you check my record, we have stood up to almost every big financial institution that has pushed legislation onto the floor of the House. Some of us, and believe me, not just me, are trying to represent the middle class and working people and not big money. And I think if you check my record out, you'll find that's the case.
Orlando, Independent Line, you're on the air.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call. Mr. Sanders, I first found out about you through the documentary Outfoxed, and I understand that you're one of the people who's very vocal about corporate control of the media. I have studied mass media for the past couple of months, and it concerns me about the information I gather from news organizations. I'm asking you, is there any legislation out there that you would like to see passed that would help our news organizations and, if you feel, keep the public better informed? Thank you.
Well, you've asked a wonderful question, and maybe sometime, Susan, we can come back and spend an hour on that one, because that's a huge issue. Here's the story. In America today, what you're seeing are fewer and fewer giant multimedia conglomerates controlling what we see, hear, and read. When you turn on NBC, it's owned by General Electric. When you turn on CBS, it's owned by Viacom. When you turn on ABC, it's owned by Disney. When you turn on Fox, it's owned by Rupert Murdoch, who is a right-wing billionaire. And by the way, let me compliment C-SPAN for being, in my view, one of the bright lights in terms of mass media where different points of view can be heard. I think that they do an excellent job. I got involved in this fight because as bad as the current situation is, where fewer and fewer media conglomerates control what we hear, see, and read, the president wants to deregulate media even more and allow fewer companies to control the flow of information. Under the president's plan, which fortunately we were able to sidetrack, it has not been implemented, you can have communities in America where you will have one corporation owning the television stations, owning the radio stations, owning the newspaper, owning the weeklies, owning the cable network in the United States of America. This is not Soviet Union. This is the United States of America. So I think the fact that you're seeing big money interest filtering the news that the American people get is a huge issue. To my mind, when you talk about domestic issues, the most significant issue facing America is what I call the collapse of the middle class. The fact that despite an increase in technology and worker productivity, the average American is working longer hours for low wages. Why is that? How often do you see that issue being discussed on television? How often do we note that the United States is the only country in the industrialized world that doesn't have a national health care program guaranteeing health care to all? Some of the most important issues facing the American people get almost no discussion at all on commercial television or, in fact, in many of our newspapers. So I think this whole issue of corporate control of media is a huge issue, and we are working hard on a number of pieces of legislation, not the least of which is to making sure that there is not further deregulation so that fewer companies control the flow of information.
We're going to take one last call from Mr. Sanders. It's from Flushing, New York, GOP line.
Yes. Oh, please don't cut me off. I just wanted to say to Mr. Sanders that we're living now in a time, we are so prosperous, this country, that everybody's trying to get here. Not only are we prosperous, but yes, there is there is a problem between the rich getting richer and the middle class isn't moving up as quick, but it will. It will. And what I'm trying to say to you is, I want to say to the American people, look at your car in your garage. See if it's new or old. Look at the house you're able to buy and see how many people are unemployed. There's more people employed in America today than ever has been. Yes, there is. That's a fact. And secondly, there are more. Everybody is trying to get into this country. And socialized medicine, people from Canada come here for an operation. There isn't any place in the world that can beat us. Yeah, we have to do better. And our government isn't the very best. But at least they're making some progress. They're saying something. Like John Kerry, I watched and listened and wanted to see what he had to say, because before this election, I was independent, and I wanted to see. He had nothing to say. And the Democrats right now have nothing to say. Maybe the Republicans have made moves, and they have made some mistakes, but at least they're making some moves. And if you're talking about socialized medicine anywhere else in the world, it cannot compare to our system here.
Okay.
And neither can our standard of living.
Okay, let me just very briefly respond to that. Unemployment is not terribly high, although it's higher than people think it is, because of the way we calculate it. But the reality is that despite an explosion of worker productivity, the average American worker today is working longer hours for lower wages. In the last 4 years, I have to inform the caller that 4 million more Americans left the ranks of the middle class and became poor, and that in the last 5 years, since George Bush has been president, there is a net loss of private sector jobs. That all of the job growth under the Bush administration has been among government jobs. And a lot of that has to do with our disastrous trade policies, which is sending good-paying jobs to China and other low-wage countries, while the new jobs being created in the United States are mostly low-wage jobs, Walmart jobs with poor benefits. So I would strongly disagree with the caller in terms of her assessment about how the economy is going. I should also add that while there is no question that if you have the money, the United States has a fantastic healthcare system. But if you are middle class, if you are working class, if you are a lower income person, you are having a difficult time getting the quality or access to the healthcare that you need.
Mr. Sanders' amendment is on C-SPAN's website, cspan.org, if you'd like to see the text of it. And a reminder that we'll be providing live coverage of the House beginning at 10 Eastern Time this morning. And his amendment is part of the debate over the Science State Justice spending bill this year, and he has 40 hours.
We brought this amendment up, and we had widespread support from the Democrats. Almost all Democrats voted for it. I'm an independent. Democrats voted for it. We had a lot of support from Republicans. At the end of regulation time, we were ahead. My memory is correct by about 18 votes. And I said, gee, we won a major victory. A lot of people concerned about the Patriot Act. This is the first victory. You know what happened? Tom DeLay and the Republican leadership simply refused to gavel the vote down. And in the next 20 minutes, beyond the normal time, we have 17 minutes to vote, they kept the voting rolls open. They went around twisting Republican arms. We lost 10 votes, and we lost that vote on a 210 to 210 tie. And there was a lot of people who were really angry when DeLay and these other folks were saying, don't worry about us impinging on democratic rights in America. You can trust us. And then they kept the voting rolls open for an extra 20 minutes in order to twist arms. So that left a very bad taste.
What are you expecting to happen today?
I think it's going to be a very close vote again. I think it's going to come down to a few votes. I think we got a shot at it. It's going to be close.
Now, we are going to get some calls here saying that you're soft on terrorism. You've heard the criticism as you've toured around. What's your response?
No, nobody is soft on terrorism in the United States Congress, I hope. Everybody understands that terrorism is a very serious threat. It is quite possible, without having made the case to a judge, an independent judiciary, that somebody is in fact a terrorist.
Why does the judge have no option?
Because the way the language is written is that if the FBI says that we're doing an investigation on international terrorism, which they certainly are, the judge says, okay, you can go in. So sometimes our opponents on this thing will say, well, they have to get permission from a judge, but really that's not the case. While they do, the judge has no option, given the way that the bill is written. And I think there is a lot of anxiety in America today. You know, we have a lot of economic problems. Middle class is shrinking. The gap between the rich and the poor is growing wider. Healthcare system is in trouble. People are concerned about the war in Iraq. And people are feeling very uneasy about losing their privacy rights and allowing the government to have more and more power to spy on us, if you like. And Susan, one of the aspects of this legislation that interests me is I am a progressive and proud of it. But we have been working with some of the most conservative members of Congress, who I think as honest conservatives believe in limited government. And they do not believe that we should be giving the government the power to monitor the reading habits of the American people. Our legislation, our efforts are also being supported by the American Library Association, the American Booksellers Association, and millions of Americans all over this country have expressed concerns about various aspects of the Patriot Act. And
to that end, yesterday in the Washington Times, there was a front page story with this headline: Conservatives, Liberals align against Patriot Act. Barr, and that's former Representative Bob Barr of Georgia, leads fight to derail Bush's renewal priority. Let me just have people understand a little bit about the process here. When the Patriot Act became law, there were a number of key provisions that were intended to sunset in various years, so the Congress would have a chance to revisit them.
Exactly.
Is this one of them?
Yes.
And so therefore what's going on right now is an appropriately timed discussion about whether or not this works.
It is. This is, in fact, a separate effort from the overall analysis of the USA Patriot Act. This is taking place within the context of the Commerce, Justice, State appropriations bill that is coming to the floor today. One of the concerns that many of us have is that the current Republican leadership has not allowed a whole lot of amendments to come to the floor in opposition to what they are trying to do. So we're seizing this opportunity to essentially say the Justice Department cannot use federal money to go into libraries and bookstores. Now, I want to tell you a little bit of history on this bill. Last summer,
continues.
Good morning. As promised on the screen, Congressman Bernie Sanders of Vermont. And today, Mr. Sanders will be presenting a piece of legislation that is going through Congress as an amendment to the Science, State, and Justice legislation. But it has to deal with a provision of the Patriot Act, Section 215, that he has been out talking about since the Patriot bill became law. What does 215 do?
Well, with 215, what my concern is that 215, as currently written, allows the FBI to go into a library and say, we would like Susan Swain's reading records. And they can get those records without really giving probable cause as to why they think you or anybody else in America is, in fact, a terrorist. All of us are concerned about terrorism. All of us want the government to do everything that we can to protect the American people. But I don't think we want to give a blank check to the FBI or any government agency basically to walk into what is a secret court and say to a judge, we're doing an investigation on terrorism, and the judge then really has no option but to say, okay, you can go in and get the reading records at a library or a bookstore, regardless of all tragic that there may be another attack on the United States. And we have got to do, as a country, everything that we can to protect the American people from terrorism. But the issue is, and this unites conservatives and progressives, can we effectively fight terrorism and protect the American people without undermining the constitutional rights which have made us a free country? That's the issue. And I feel very, very strongly that it is wrong to give up our basic freedoms. That is not what we should be doing. And you're seeing a lot of people coming together to say, yeah, fight terrorism, but protect our constitutional rights.
Before we go to calls, then, what would you specifically do to change the process on 215?
Well, what today's legislation is about is a very simple one. It simply, our amendment simply takes out libraries and bookstores from the language that the FBI can investigate. So they will not be able to go into libraries and bookstores. They will not be able to monitor the reading habits of the American people. And the reason I'm doing that is that librarians in Vermont and all over this country are telling me, we don't want, when people go into the library and they take out a book, you know, maybe it's a biography of Osama bin Laden, maybe it's a book on terrorism, They don't want somebody monitoring their reading habits and thinking that they're a terrorism because they're reading a certain book. We don't want kids not to be